Hello everyone, my name is Nathan and today it's time for the second episode of Let's Make a Game. In the previous episode we already managed to get a basic tile generation going, and we also have some basic camera movements into all directions. We can even zoom in and out as we please. In today's episode, I would love to get some GUI functionality in the joint, and I already thought this kind of through, and hopefully we will accomplish something together today. What I would like to do is to have a GUI crafting menu here in the bottom left corner with a bunch of categories, and as soon as we click one of the buttons, then more options are gonna appear on the top. Now, to demonstrate this a little bit better, I prepared a little Paint document. So if we just pop that up right here, I can show you what I mean. So unfortunately, you're barely able to see my mouse here on this document. However, you can see the category buttons are basically at the bottom. It's number 1, 2 and 3. If I click number 1, then the button 1, 1, 1, 2 and 1, 3 will appear, and those are gonna be basic functionalities, for instance crafting a conveyor belt of some sorts. So this is gonna be the basic crafting menu with maybe 5 pixels in between each of the buttons. Cool, now these numbers are actually rather important. I already took myself the liberty of preparing something right here so we can progress a little bit faster. I made all of the buttons as a sprite graphic. So for instance, the button number 1 would be sprite button GUI 01. And then the button above it, the 1 button, would be sprite button GUI 01_01. The next one above it would be GUI 01_02, and so on and so forth. And with that together, I have 3 main categories and all of the subcategories as a separate graphic. Cool, so now that you know what we're talking about, let's get rid of that window and actually have a quick look into the graphic itself. Right here you can see, if we edit the sprite, that each of these graphics consists out of 3 images. Of course, these are just placeholders for the time being. What we have is image 0 as a grayed out state, which means we still have to unlock it. It is not accessible from the beginning. Then image number 1 is the normal state, so it is unlocked, and image 2 would be the mouse over effect. Cool, now all of these graphics currently have the same thing to them. Of course, once we know what the individual buttons are gonna do, we are gonna change the graphics accordingly. Cool, with that out of the way, there's one more thing I created, which is a script, the script draw GUI, and it is currently still empty. However, I attached it to our core object within the draw GUI event, so right here. So that is basically everything that is new. Now we can get to the coding right away. So first things first, let's open up the global variables and change a few things around right here. Within the global variables, I would like to add another category, which is unlocked. So here we set everything that is unlocked in the beginning, and of course this can then afterwards be easily changed. So first of all, I would say we're gonna decide whether or not the individual categories are visible. So the usual state would be that only the first 3 buttons in one row would be visible. If I click the number 1 button, then everything above it will appear. Thus, it needs to be invisible in the beginning, and we're gonna call this variable global buttons GUI 01_visible equals true. No, equals false actually. We don't want it to be visible in the beginning. Then we need to decide, is the category actually already unlocked? So we can also lock or unlock the individual categories. So this is gonna be global.button GUI 01_unlocked. I'm gonna set this to true. Good, so now that we have the main category button unlocked, let's also unlock everything above it. I'm gonna global unlock the button GUI 01_01 unlocked. And we're also gonna set this to true. Now, just to be on the same page, if I open up my MS Paint document here, you can see this last variable, the GUI 01_01 unlocked, is of course the button above the number 1, so the button 1, 1. And now of course we have to do this for each individual button, so we would also want to unlock button 0102 and we would want to unlock button 0103. Or for instance, we could say the button 3 is not unlocked in the beginning. We would have to do something with the tech tree or whatever to unlock it. So that's what that's for. Now we have to do the same thing for each of our categories. So the second category would be the GUI 02. Then the main button, we want this to be unlocked. And then of course all of these we want to change into GUI 02. And here of course we can for instance say that both of the upper buttons are actually locked still. So we would not be able to access them. And one last time, of course, we need to do it for the third category, and as we add more categories, we can expand this menu very simply. So there we go, everything changed into GUI 03, and with that out of the way, I think we're actually doing good. Let's actually unlock everything in GUI 03. I mean, we can play around with these true-false statements as we please. Cool, so global variables are set. Now we can actually go into the draw GUI thingy-majingy, and this is gonna be one heck of a code here. Good, I might pop up this window as we need it, but for now I think you know what we're talking about. You have a visual representation, what I'm going for. Let's check out the real thing. So first things first, the title, of course, this is going to be in the draw GUI event, and I don't see a reason to call it any different. The first thing we're gonna do is we are gonna set the variables, right? So let's make a title like this, and let's decide what the access state is gonna be. So is it gonna be locked, is it gonna be unlocked, or is it gonna be mouse over? And I'm just gonna define a variable here called locked, which would be the image 0. So in case we want to change that in the future, we can easily do that. Unlocked would be the frame number 1 or the sprite image number 1, and of course mouse over would be the number 3, if you remember from earlier. Cool, next up we need to define the mouse position on the actual GUI. We want to track that position, so let's make another section called mouse position if I'm able to write it. And that is a new command actually, or a new variable. We want to store that in the, let's say, mouse x pos. This is going to be my variable, and for that we need the window mouse get x function. There we go. And of course we do the same thing with the y pos of the mouse, making sure we don't capitalize letters we don't want to capitalize. There we go. That's basically it. Now we can get to the individual buttons. So we want to know how large these buttons are. Currently I made them 128 pixels by 48 pixels. So let's actually note that here in two variables. The button width, which is 128, and the button height, which is 48 pixels. Okay, cool. And then if you remember, I wanted to have a little bit of space in between each of the buttons, and we're gonna call this variable margin, right? That's a correct word for that, isn't it? Let's set the margin to 5 pixels for the time being. Okay, great. Now, I would suggest we are gonna try to store all of the positions where we want the buttons to be in variables as well. So let's go with another section called buttons Y positions, right? So we first want to define all the possible Y positions, which aren't a lot. There are only 4 Y positions. So if I open up this window, currently we have an additional 3 buttons on top of our category buttons, which makes 4 Y positions in total. So let's try to define the Y position main, which is going to be the category position, so the lowest position. And we're going to set this to view H port. And the H port is of course how large your resolution currently is. And that would be of 0. And we want to set this minus global.tilesize minus the button height. Now, of course, what this does is create a space between the button and the actual end of the port. Because we first subtract a tile size, which currently is 32 pixels, and then also the button height, which results in a 32 pixels border between the button and the end of the screen. Cool, so now we have the main position. Let's also set the Y position for the button above it. So I'm gonna call this Y position 0001. So 0, 0 basically as a placeholder for it doesn't matter which category, but it is the first button in the category, so the first button above it. I'm just trying to be thorough with my explanations here, so you understand clearly what's going on. I think the easiest way to define this second position is to use the Y position main we already defined above, and we want to set this to -1 times in brackets button height plus margin. Yeah, that seems about right. And what we can do now is simply copy this bad boy and set it 2 more times for the position 02, which it's gonna be 2 times button height plus margin. And the position 3 is gonna be 3 times button height plus margin. Easy as that. And of course, if we come up with more things in each individual category, we simply have to add another Y position. For now, we only have 3 buttons on top of the first one. So there you go. Let's now define the button's X positions. And for that, currently we have 3 positions because we have 3 categories. So let's set the X position 01. And we want to set that equal to global.tilesize. So it's going to start at 32 pixels away from the left corner. Then we want to set the X position 02, which is going to be X position 01 plus button width plus margin, right? We want to place it on the right side of our first button plus an additional 5 pixels for the margin. So the third one would be X position 03 equals X position 02. Let's actually just copy that so we don't make any mistakes. X position 02 plus button width plus margin. And you can see we don't have to change a lot for each individual thing. And we want a functionality to disable it completely. So that's what we're gonna do here. We're gonna deactivate any pop-ups, let's call it that. And for that we want to check if the mouse check button released. There we go, mouse button right. If we click and release the mouse button right anywhere on the screen, it doesn't matter where. We want to set the global.buttons GUI 01 visible to false. And of course we want to do the same thing with all of them. So this will disable the categories. We set these variables in the global variables, if you remember before in the beginning. So there we go. All of the sub buttons are going to be disabled if we right click the mouse. Now we can finally get to draw the freaking buttons. And it's going to be kind of a piece of code here. Let's begin with the button GUI 01. What we first want to check, of course, if the global.button GUI 01 is unlocked or not. So if that is true, we want to do something. And that something is to check whether or not the mouse is over the button, first of all. So let's check for a mouse over here. If the mouse X position, if you remember, we defined this here on the top. The mouse X position is always tracked, and here we can use that variable. So if the X position is bigger than the X position 01, which of course is where our first button starts. So we basically just want to check if the coordinates of our mouse are within the button positions we set earlier. So we will always have to check 2 X's. We have to check bigger than and smaller than. So if it is bigger than X position 01, and also if the mouse X position is smaller than the X position 01 plus the button width. And holy cow, that is written wrong. Position, this is a very, very difficult word. So if it is smaller than the X position 01 plus the button width. Easy as that. And with that we can also change the graphics. We can make the button width larger or smaller as we please. However, this is not all we want to check. Of course, we also want to check the Y position. So if the Y position is bigger than Y position main and the mouse Y position is smaller than the Y position main plus button height. There we go. So it's a good thing we defined all of these variables in the beginning. And of course right here I forgot a little and thingy-majingy. Cool, now we have this area defined of the first button, and what do we want to happen here? Of course we want to draw the mouse over sprite. So we're gonna draw a sprite, and it's gonna be the sprite button GUI 01, and we want to draw the subimage mouse over, which we defined on the top. And of course we want to draw it at the X position 01 and the Y position main. Very, very cool. Now let's also change the visibility of the buttons above. So that means if we actually click on the button, so we are not only hovering over it, if we click it, then we want to reveal the menu above it. And we do that with a if mouse check button released. I want to check for the mouse button left, of course. Set up the brackets. Then we want to change the global.buttons GUI 01 visible to be equal to true. In the beginning, by default, it's false. If we globally right click, it's gonna be false. But if we click on the first button, it's gonna be true. Great. Okay, now that we have that, we want to go right here and set up an else condition. So in case the above statement is not true right here, if we are not hovering over the mouse, we want to set the unlocked sign. That means we want to draw the sprite but on a different subimage. We're gonna still draw the same sprite, which is button GUI 01, but we want to have the subimage which is called unlocked. We want to set the same X position 01 and the Y position main. There we go. Great. Now there's only one more possibility left, and that is namely if we don't have the GUI 01 unlocked, then it should be grayed out and showing the first image or the image 0. And of course we do that if this condition here fails. So basically right here everything else failed, so we want to say else, and here we want to draw the locked image. So that's gonna be draw sprite underscore button GUI 01. It's gonna be the locked frame at the X position 01 and Y position main. Great, okay, that should already be working out. Let's actually test it out just to be sure. There we go. Here we have our little button, and as you can see, oh, it's showing the wrong frame when I'm hovering over it. It should actually be showing the subimage 2 and not 0. Ah yeah, look at that. Mouse over. I should have set this to the number 2. There we go. Mistake fixed. Okay, look at that. Now we have our button. It is unlocked. If we hover over it, it is going to be on the mouse over effect, and it is pixel perfect. So that is great. Now we only have to set the same thingy-majingy for all the other GUI buttons. So let me actually quickly do that. What I'm going to do is copy this over and just change the individual things. For instance, the X position should be the second position. Then right here it should be the GUI 02, etc, etc. And there we go. So right here we had the code we made together, and right here you can see it is copied over for the second and the third category. So if we start up the game right now, what we should be seeing is 3 buttons we can hover over, and if we click, then the visibility of the individual categories is true. However, we haven't drawn them in, so that's what we're gonna do right now. Let's start a new category here. This is gonna be sub buttons. That's what I'm gonna call it. Yes, indeed. And the first thing we want to do right here is the GUI 01. That's what we want to take care of first. What we want to check is, of course, whether or not it is visible at the moment. So we're gonna set check if the global buttons GUI 01 visible is true. If that is true, then we want to do everything else. The first thing, of course, we want to do is set the category 0101. So that's the button above the number 1. We have to set the positions for this one, so that's going to be interesting. Right here we want the mouse X position to be bigger than the X position 01, because of course X is not going to change, right? It is still the first column. So we can set this to the same thing we had before. Mouse X position should be smaller than X position 01 plus the button width. And oh my gosh, I just disabled the coloring. How did I do that? Ah, there we go, F10. I accidentally pressed F10. Anyways, we also want to check the mouse Y position, of course. The mouse Y position is gonna be different this time. It's gonna be the Y position 0001. If you remember, we defined that upstairs as well. And the mouse Y position should also be smaller than the Y position 0001 plus button height. There we go, something like that, curly brackets. And right here, we want to do the same thing as before. So we basically could have copied it down. That would have made it a lot easier. But still, it's going to be the sprite button GUI 0101. This time, it's going to be the mouse over state, X position 01 and Y position 0001. There we go. Cool. So now we only need to execute an action if we are actually clicking on that. So we are gonna set if the mouse check button released, mouse button left. If that is the case, we want to execute an action, right? For now, I don't know what that action is gonna be. So if that fails, if we don't have the mouse hovering over it, we want to show the unlocked state of the thingy-majingy. Unlocked, of course, is going to be the draw sprite thing, the same thing right here. So we're going to copy that over, but it's going to be the button. No, it's not going to be the mouse over, it's going to be the unlocked stage. Yeah, you know what? I forgot an if statement right here. We want to first of all check if it is also unlocked, not only visible, but if global.button GUI 0101 is unlocked or not. That is important. If that is true, then we want this shebang to happen here. Right, and then right here we can set another else statement, which is gonna be the locked stage. So we really have the same thing as before. We want to draw a sprite button GUI 0101, and this is going to be the locked stage at the X position 01 and the Y position 0001. There we go. Cool, now we have to do this for all 9 additional buttons. So I'm gonna copy this statement over twice and change the individual things, for instance into GUI 0102 in order to get the button above it. And of course we also have to change the Y positions here. So this shouldn't be Y position 01, it should be 02 in the second one. And then once that is done, I will add another entire paragraph with the GUI 02. So if the GUI 02 is visible, then we do the same thing for the second menu, etc, etc. Let me quickly complete that for the sake of saving a little bit of time. We don't need to do it, it's gonna be repetitive. However, I still want to show you the end results. Okay, there we go, guys. This is the code we had before right here. I added the 1-2 button and the 1-3 button in a similar fashion, just changed a bunch of the positions according to the variables we set before. I did the same thing for the GUI 02 and I did the same thing for the GUI 03. So there's just a lot of copy and paste and changing a bunch of things from 1s to 2s and from 2s to 3s. There we go, beautiful. We have 246 lines of code, of course including the comments. However, let's run the game and check out if we succeeded. Right here we have our 3 buttons. It is beautiful. I can hover over them respectively and we can click one button in order to get the subcategories. And you can already see that the 3rd button right here is still locked because we set that in the global variables. We can also at the same time enable the 2nd menu and we could click these buttons in order to craft something nice. And we can do the same thing with the 3rd menu. I don't want the other menus to go away. If you want them to be open, you can't have them open. What we should add, however, is a functionality to click this button again in order to reverse the effect. For the time being, we just have the global right click in order to get rid of all the visibilities right here and nothing is gonna happen anymore. Cool. Now, with that out of the way, I would say we're gonna wrap up the episode. Not sure what we're gonna take care of the next time, but I'm excited to continue this series. Don't forget to leave down your support, it really helps. Let me know what you want to see in the game, what kinds of ideas we could come up with. And other than that, enjoy your time and see you soon. Bye bye.